All right, ladies and gentlemen. I put a poll up earlier. Concerning what I was going to do today, and I put it up to you guys. The choices were have a big stream talking about All for One and the events of the latest chapter of My Hero, which was chapter 423, I believe. Hold on. Let me recheck on Viz. Let me recheck and see what that chapter was. 423. Yes, 423. Or I play episode 2. Pardon me. Or I play episode 2 of season 1 of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. And out of all the votes, it was I wouldn't say unanimous, but out of all the votes, the majority of them went towards talking about All for One. And there's quite a bit to go through concerning this particular character and why I've named this stream All for One, the Loneliest Villain. So let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and get started so that way we can get into the meat of the matter, shall we? Yo, peoples, Kyushu92 here, and welcome to my All for One discussion. Now, due to just how deep into the story of My Hero we're about to go into today, if there's anyone out there who is just solely relying on the anime to, see how the story goes out, you may not want to watch this stream because I'm going to be talking about some heavy story spoilers, including one massive story spoiler that transpired due to this week's chapter of this past Sunday. So I'm just kind of giving you guys a little bit of a chance to vacate, so that way you don't get spoiled if you still want to remain anime only. But for the rest of us, some major things went down during the course of this story, and more recently, the latest chapter of My Hero. Well, not to drag it out or anything, pretty much saw the total end of All for One. What we thought was the end of All for One let's just go back a ways, shall we? So let's start at the beginning for this character. This character in particular is pretty much the big bad of the entire story. A whole bunch of evil mess that's been happening in the story of My Hero is more or less has been orchestrated by All for One with one distinct purpose. In order to guide this groomed child named Tomura Shigaraki, Shigaraki being All for One's surname. We never get his full name, but his surname is Shigaraki. Kenneth Moore, hey, what's going on? We're talking about All for One today. If you are one who has not caught up to the manga, then this will be story heavy. Story spoiler heavy for you. But if you are caught up, then this would be a perfect place for us to discuss All for One as a character and what led to his rise and ultimate end due to the recent chapter. So, if you are reading the manga alongside like I am, then you're fine. But if I got anybody who relies on the anime only stuff, then you may not want to be here. Matter of fact, I need to edit this title. Yeah, let me just go ahead and edit it so that this includes the fact that it's going to have some story spoilers in it. And give me a sec, let me edit my camera because it's still very bright on the side of my face here. It's a bit too much. Don't want that. It's a bit too much. There we go. That's a more comfortable hue right there. All right, so let's start at the beginning. So, All for One, surname Shigaraki, started out as being born in an age before quirks even had a classification. One of the first quirks we got to see in the story of, chronologically, the first quirk reveal was essentially during the time before All for One was even born. He was born to basically to a prostitute, and she had the spear-like limbs that All for One would later use in life. Now, due to the unique nature of All for One and his power, essentially his quirk was already active within him before he was even born. So when his mother gave, and mind you, he was still in the womb, but he was still using his power unconsciously, and that led to his mother's demise. Yeah, I'm all caught up on the manga and anime. Excellent, so I can continue. He pretty much is the reason why his mother died. While he was still in the womb, he was basically absorbing and taking all the nutrients and energy from her body and taking it for himself. Even before he was even born, he had this drive to make everything belong to him. Even his own mother's body and her nutrients that kept her alive essentially belonged to him. And it was so serious was this animalistic drive, even before he was even born, that it's what caused his younger brother Yoichi, to essentially be born weaker than All for One, because All for One basically stole all of the necessary nutrients for both of them to be healthy babies. Now, when they were born, All for One and the body of their mother was was about to be set upon by rats, but then this massive wave of water came in because it was storming. And then rats came in to try and eat the mom's body, and then water just washed them all away. But All for One still held on to his little brother, not out of care, not out of affection, but because even as a baby, All for One saw everything around him as something that just his possession, essentially. And after stealing his mother's quirk, the spear-like limbs, he used that to, get up on the river bank, and he just held on to his brother. And like I said, it was not out of affection, but it was because he just saw his brother as a possession. And later on in life, he would never see his brother as anything but that. Halster, good to see you. We are talking about My Hero Academia, and basically this is just going to be an All for One discussion. So, as the boys grew up, even All for One is quoted saying, like, if people didn't give me what I wanted, then, matter of fact, I need to go back and find that particular chapter, because that chapter was good. I think it was, let me see. This is the memory of Shigaraki. No. I need to find it. Because it was during the time when he was growing up, and there were people who were calling those who had quirks basically freaks or just like strange monsters. Actually, you know what? Let's just read out his entire synopsis. Yeah, let's just read out his entire synopsis, because that's something that I kind of want to do. So let me move it to the side out here. Yeah, because I don't want to just paraphrase. I want to say it with knowledge that was, built up over time. And let me just move this over here. I really just need chat off to the side so I can see all of you. So this is the history of All for One, and we're going to be dipping into not only all My Hero Academia stuff, but also stuff from apparently Vigilantes as well, which I haven't read, but I think it's fine because I'll read it later. But going forward, early life of All for One. The Shigaraki brothers were born to a sex worker who wasn't even aware of her pregnancy for the first 8 months, in an era before meta abilities were known, with the mother unknowingly possessing one which caused hardened growths to appear on her arm, which essentially would be the spear-like limbs. She died in childbirth by a riverbank as a result of the twins sapping away her life force, with the older brother in particular consuming most of the nutrients, leaving very little for his younger brother, Yoichi. Upon the twins' birth, the older brother, who also happened to possess a meta ability to steal other meta abilities, immediately stole the mother's meta ability spear-like bones for himself while devouring the body and holding his younger brother's arm. And like that chapter says, he didn't hold it out of affection, but because he saw his brother as a possession. Just as rats came to gnaw on the newborns and their mother's corpse, they were washed away by the flood. 1 year later, the luminescent baby was born, and meta abilities became more wide known and recognized, with the research group hypothesizing that a novel disease was to blame, announcing that those with meta abilities were sub-branches of humanity with new genetic factors. This announcement caused many people to be divided, and chaos started to grow, with people without meta abilities waging war and terror against the ones with powers, and the latter doing the same. The older Shigaraki brother grew up alongside his younger brother within this hellish world on their own. The older brother named his younger brother Yoichi, using the kanji for bestow and won, because he was his first possession. He approached a group of anti-meta masked soldiers who, despite their sympathy for the boy, they recognize him as an exceptional child, saying they should leave him be since the kids are most likely to be carriers. He then sprouted an array of spear-like bones from his body, killing them all instantly. Due to his imbued hubris and disrespect for others from the moment of his birth, literally born with absolutely no sense of respect for anyone and just viewed everyone as beneath him. From birth, mind you. The older brother viewed all within his reach as his own possessions, and those who wouldn't turn to look at him when he cried, or those who couldn't provide him with anything, he responded with utter distrust. The boy proceeded to rampage throughout the streets, killing everyone who refused him and stealing their meta abilities. So even as a child, he had this mindset of, like, everything belongs to me. If you don't give it to me, I will kill you. As a child, he already had this mindset, and he would keep this whole entire mindset throughout the rest of his life. Let's see. During one of his rampages, Yoichi threw a can at him, telling him to stop hurting people, but his brother kicked him down in response. While Yoichi provided him with nothing, the older brother still considered him one of his possessions he would not easily release, so he kept him close. Literally an abusive relationship. You can't go anywhere. You belong to me. You're mine. You offer me nothing, but you're my possession, and therefore I'm just going to keep you because you belong to me, period. Such a horrible relationship for a sibling. So glad none of my siblings ever had that same mentality, or me towards them. While Yoichi providing him with nothing, the older brother still considered him one of his possessions he would not easily release, so he kept him close. Throughout his childhood, the older brother would do as he pleases, killing and stealing meta abilities. This pretty much is like Sylar from Heroes. If anyone who watched the Heroes series, Save the Cheerleader, Save the World, if any of you watch that series, All For One essentially functions like the way he does things is very similar to Sylar. Whereas Sylar does it out of this instinctual need, this hunger to gain more power. All For One does it because, well, we'll find out here in a minute. But it's kind of similar how Sylar and All For One are, in par with each other in terms of how they gain their powers and stuff. And every time Yoichi would try to stop him, he would respond with physical abuse or retaliation for interfering with him. One day, as Yoichi was self-teaching himself to read, the older brother approaches him, demanding to know what it is he is reading. Yoichi says he's still learning, so he's reading Captain Hero comic books, which he considers amazing, since they tell you the hopes and dreams in people through the drawings. He says one day he would like to be like the hero in the book. The older brother took an interest in the comic too and started reading with him. 3 years later, as the world descended into further chaos due to the meta abilities, the older brother felt discontent with the luminescent baby's increasing popularity. That's where you see that if you have more than All For One wants it. You can't have more than him because everything belongs to him. So if you have more than what he has currently, he's going to come after you so that he can take what is already his in that sense. Felt discontent with the luminescent baby's increased popularity, gaining millions of followers as they preach peace for society, calling it weird why they should be the one to be so popular just because they were the first recorded, especially with 50 babies being born with meta abilities in India 2 weeks ago. The older brother decided that the child and their followers did not deserve the right to mobilize so many, so he killed them and stole their meta ability. Hey, I see you over there getting mighty popular. More popular than me. Yoichi, you stay here. I'm gonna be right back. I'll be back in a couple of days. Proceeds to kill the luminescent baby and all of his followers, just because they had more than him. He revealed this whole thing to Yoichi, who reacts in shock and horror. Yoichi asked why he did it, and the older brother responded that he did it just like what the comics said, one for all and all for one, sharing his dream to Yoichi. While Yoichi was a fan of the titular protagonist Captain Hero, the older brother became a fan of Captain Hero's nemesis, the Demon Lord King. While the hero fought in solitude with a secret identity, the Demon Lord was paid tribute and ruled out of fear. Just like Yoichi's dream of being a hero, he now wants a world solely for his own sake, having found his own dream. His own dream being that the world bends to his will. Everything in the world will belong to him. Everyone will serve him. If he wants it, he'll get it. The whole world would just be his. And everyone in it, and every possession of everyone in it. That's essentially his mindset. And that has been his goal up until the moment where he starts to run into users of One for All, but we'll get to that. The older brother, now going by his quirk name, All for One, rose to new heights in Japan. He decided to exploit the chaos, stole many quirks, and attained immense power and influence. Using his incredible might, the man unified thousands of people under his command. Unified is a very stretched word. What really it was, he used honey words to have people follow him, and also intimidation and fear to keep those people in line so that they would never betray him. Using his incredible might, the man unified thousands of people under his command. He then manipulated the people he gathered like pawns to further his plans and eventually became the ruler of Japan. He just became the ruler of Japan. With all that power and with his quirk's abilities, he was essentially able to rule over Japan with no one being able to stand toe-to-toe with him at all because he was just that strong. It's suggested that he ruled from the shadows, as most of his actions in the present day are only known as rumors on the internet. He also started grooming other powerful individuals who he deemed to have a lot of potential, such as Gigantomachia, who became his personal bodyguard, though when this happened is unknown. All for One was accused of atrocity for his actions by Yoichi. All for One claimed he was only helping people by taking away undesirable quirks and giving power to the weak, thus contributing to restore humanity in a chaotic era. He then gave a demonstration of how he used his quirk to help others and presented two people. A young man with a quirk that gave him a mutant jaw. He caringly looked after his grandparents, but was shunned by society because of his facial appearance. Even his parents wouldn't speak with him. And an ordinary man who was attacked by a group of quirk users, with the stun gun he relied on being rendered useless. Reading the beginning after the end next. Isn't that dropping on Friday? It's supposed to be dropping on Friday, so that'll be on Friday. Because I don't think there's a new chapter out today. Hold on. Let me check. Never mind. There is a brand new chapter at the beginning after the end out. Great. Okay. So that means I can't spend too long on All for One because I gotta set everything up for the beginning after the end. I thought this was every Friday. This is a Thursday. Okay. All right. Thanks for telling me. I didn't know it was a surprise drop for me. Yeah, okay. So, we can't spend too long on All for One because we gotta read the beginning after the end. But it's all good. We're just going to read through his history and talk to him about him as a character. So it won't be too long. I'm going to cover them both, All for One and chapter 178 of the webcomic. So, All for One then used his, with the stun gun he relied on being rendered useless. All for One then used his power to take away the young man's quirk, subsequently removing his mutant jaw and giving the other man a quirk proficient for self-defense. After doing so, All for One asks the two if he can call on them in times of need, and both men swear their allegiance to him in gratitude. But that's how he gets you. Okay, I'm gonna do this thing for you, and then later on in life, and God forbid that day should come, I'm gonna call upon you to do for me a service. And that's essentially what this is. Except, unlike The Godfather, All for One does not care about the lives of those that he has under him. He doesn't. If they die, they die. He'll just replace them with other people. Yoichi, however, pointed out that All for One was only conducting subtle schemes as to gather followers and would dispose of them after they had become worthless to him. Yoichi refused to give in to his brother's sophistry, and tried to rebel, but was stopped by All for One's personal bodyguard, Makia. All for One berated his brother for not having a quirk, but says he still loved him as he is his only family, and imprisoned him rather than kill him. When All for One visited his captive brother, he saw how emaciated he had become. He tells Yoichi about how a group who refused to join him were killed simply because his followers interpreted his desires as instructions to kill them. All for One admits that it's like a dream come true, just like in the comics when they were kids. Yoichi was disgusted and voiced his defiance against his brother, telling him that he had only read up to volume 3 of the series and that there was more to the story, saying that powerful villains always lose to the heroes of justice. Insulted, All for One reproaches him that real life does not work like in comics, yet he's basing his dream for his life off of a comic. And that he will rewrite reality. Eventually, in a twisted showcase of affection, All for One decided to forcefully implant a power stockpiling quirk that even his frail body could handle, with the intent of turning him to his side. All for One grabs his brother's forehead and transfers the quirk to stockpile power to him despite his pleas to stop. What no one knew at the time is that Yoichi already had an innate quirk, and the two quirks merged to form a new quirk, One for All. And then we cut to the battle against the One for All users. When All for One was reaching the peak of his powers, he was being opposed by a resistance led by a spiky-haired man named Kudo, the future second user of One for All. And while he had no direct confrontation with this resistance, he allowed his growing number of subordinates to deal with him and the rest later. One day, Kudo and his companion Bruce, the future third user, rescued Yoichi from his imprisonment after deciding against their initial assassination attempt. 2 months later, after Yoichi was freed, All for One tracked his brother to the Resistance base of operations to reclaim him. He confronts them in the sewers as they attempted to flee, annoyed at why his brother was trying to escape him, and even more so at the man who had stolen his property. Fed up with his brother refusing to listen, All for One uses a spatial distortion meta ability on Yoichi to kill him, leaving nothing behind but his left hand. If I can't have you, no one can. So even though he sees Yoichi as his only family and his property, he would rather destroy what belongs to him than allow it to be in anyone else's hands or even for that person to go free. It just shows you how messed up in the mind he actually is. An emotional Kudo, covered in Yoichi's blood, stared into All for One's thin, clouded eyes, which didn't reflect anything and showed no sense of feeling before escaping. All for One recovers Yoichi's hand and examines it in his tower, realizing that the meta ability he forcibly gave to him was gone, which had never happened before. He thought his brother didn't have a meta ability and he unconsciously stole it when they were babies, but through examination found out that he actually did have a factor, but it was so insignificant and non-functioning that his own power didn't even recognize it as a meta ability. He thinks the factor never quite took form, possibly due to malnourishment, and wonders if it somehow activated itself. All for One comes to the conclusion that the meta ability he granted Yoichi was essentially absorbed by his own to make up for what it lacked, and also meaning that he still lives on within the meta ability. He tracks down Kudo to reclaim his brother's meta ability and to exact revenge for making him kill his brother, massacring the entire resistance and leaving only Kudo standing to oppose him. Kudo wasn't strong enough to defeat All for One. However, by this point, he had already passed down Yoichi's meta ability, now known as One for All, to Bruce. With Kudo defeated, All for One held him by the throat, demanding to know the whereabouts of his younger brother. Kudo replied that Yoichi is dead, and he was the one who killed him. For the first time, All for One felt incredibly anguished upon hearing this, though he claimed his crocodile tears were just to cause confusion, as everything he loathed and coveted he manipulated and corrupted to make all his own. He began to choke the life out of Kudo, easily stopping a bullet shot at him from behind by Kudo's meta ability Gear Shift. All for One eventually kills Kudo, all the while in his final moments he simply smiles at the villain in satisfaction. We sure that Kudo isn't a D in real life? Because only Ds from One Piece smile in the face of death. Throughout the century, because remember, he was born a century ago. He's over 100 years old. Throughout the century, All for One became obsessed with acquiring One for All, and sought out every successor who obtained it in an attempt to reclaim his brother. In an extra level of petty revenge against Kudo, he exterminated his family bloodline, including any women and child he was close to. He found and killed Bruce, but discovered he no longer had One for All within him, and was unable to track down the fourth user, Hikage Shinomori. It was during this time, as he continued to consolidate his power amongst the masses, that he met Kyodai Garaki, which is the doctor guy that you see earlier in the series. The same doctor that said that Midoriya didn't have a quirk, but was secretly working behind the scenes with All for One and stealing the quirks from people. And that included children, but we'll get to that. It was Kyodai theorized the quirk singularity, according to which someday quirks will become so powerful that they will be uncontrollable. But society scoffed at this theory, so he disappeared from the public eye. However, possibly due to the nature of his own quirk, All for One relieved this theory and lent Kyodai his aid. Since then, Kyodai has been working for All for One. As a gift of loyalty and appreciation, Kyodai duplicated his Life Force quirk and gave his original quirk to All for One, keeping the duplicate. Thanks to this, both he and All for One continue to live to this day. Now, live to this day might as well be past tense, but just to clarify here, Kyodai had the longevity quirk that allowed All for One to live this long. Like, the extended lifespan, that's the quirk from Kyodai, because Kyodai, who knows how long Kyodai has been alive for him to have, like, an extended lifespan quirk? Because he looks like an old man in the present day, so who knows how old he actually is? He probably may be older than even All for One, even all the way back then, because if you look at Kyodai, he's a old man, bald head, thick gray mustache, and when his quirk is deactivated by Aizawa, you get to see that he's this incredibly frail, old-looking man with sunken-in eyes and super wrinkled features. So who knows how old Kyodai is? Eventually, All for One tracked down the fifth user, Daigoro Banjo, and attempted to steal One for All from him, but surprisingly failed. Daigoro was able to pass the quirk onto the sixth user, and Teyutai. Before he was killed, All for One tried again to steal the quirk from N, but once again failed, which it turns out was due to its inherent willpower and refusal to submit to All for One. We can thank Yoichi for that, to refusal to submit to his own brother. That is what helped fuel All for One's inability to actually steal the quirk. All for One tried to steal it, once again failed, and refused to submit to All for One. N was sliced in half, but managed to survive long enough to pass the quirk along to the seventh user, Nana Shimura, who then managed to escape. Sometime later, Nana, along her pupil, the eighth bearer Toshinori Yagi, All Might, and her friend Sorahiko Torino, Gran Torino, Sorahiko Torino, tried to fight him. However, despite their best efforts, All for One still overwhelmed them. Aware that they could not defeat him, Nana pushed Toshinori out of harm's way, and Gran Torino fled with Toshinori as the young man cries for his master. Nana departed some final words of encouragement onto Toshinori before standing against All for One last time. The villain mocked Nana for providing quality comedy before killing her by unleashing a large flash of black lightning. Now, if you see the OVA, you see that the blast encompasses the entire island that All for One was fighting Nana Shimura on. And I watched it, and it's massive. It covers the entire area, so there was absolutely no way for anyone to survive that. However, before that, Nana managed to get the last words as he was choking her out, as she told him Toshinori would be the one to finally defeat him, since he's even crazier than himself. Which we then later learn, because All Might is, he's, as a hero, he's insane. Soon afterwards, All for One came to realize that, as a result of his encounters with Daigoro and En, in order to secure One for All, he needed to surpass the willpower of every user who held before it. To that end, he searched for a soul that would grind away at their willpower, a quest for the most powerful of emotions, born from the heart's suppression, and planned to cultivate a seed bed for hatred to grow. At some point, he would run a front company called Koga Constructions to continue funding his power. He ended up making contact with Nana's son Kotaro Shimura, with the two acting friendly towards each other. One time, All for One asked if he would like to see a doctor to help him with his condition, but Kotaro brushed it off as if it's not a big deal. He was aware of Kotaro's sad upbringing and disdain for heroes after his mother abandoned him, which we learned was not the case because All for One killed her and kept her from coming home, which then led to Kotaro looking at his mother as if she just gave him up and abandoned him because she was far too busy being a hero to take care of her own son, but it's really All for One's fault that she did not make it back. And it's All for One's fault that Kotaro has a hate for heroes, which really works to his advantage, because now he can take that hate and mold it with subtle words, honeyed words, and, like a little prodding in the right direction. And that kind of leads to one of the most messed up things that All for One has done in this entire series. Let's see, he was aware of Kotaro's sad upbringing and disdain for heroes after his mother abandoned him, and told Kotaro about how heroes never show up to aid when they're actually needed, so children need siblings to help each other out. Kotaro took his advice and sired a son named Tenko Shimura. That's the messed up moment. Essentially, it's because of All for One that Tomoda Shigaraki was even born. Because, well, pretty much he saw that the daughter... Well, actually, we'll get to that, but it's really messed up that All for One literally encouraged the idea for Kotaro to have another child. Because the basic idea of it was he wanted to have a vessel later on in life, but the daughter was too old. The daughter Hana was too old, but a younger child with a more malleable disposition, that would be far easier. He literally encouraged the birth of a child who would later he would try to take the body over. That's how messed up he is. He literally encouraged the birth of a child he would take over later on in life. Just for that specific purpose. It's messed up. Took his advice and sired a son named Tenko Shimura. All for One needed a very fragile vessel he could manipulate and take control of, and because Kotaro's daughter Hana was too old, he chose to use Tenko. When he visited the newborn Tenko, All for One stole Tenko's original quirk factor inherited from his parents, before it could manifest, leaving the boy quirkless, and we don't even know what that quirk is, we never found out. He proceeded to keep his distance, but subtly forced his way into his life, encouraging Kotaro's harsher treatment and observing Tenko's admiration for heroes. At a dinner another time, All for One asks if Tenko has already manifested a quirk, but Kotaro replies that he hasn't yet. One day, when Tenko was 5 years old, he saved his friends from being run over by a truck, and All for One, under the guise of an old man, offered to walk Tenko home. As he held his hand, All for One secretly transferred a quirk to him, Decay. This quirk was derived from the Overhaul quirk, taken from an orphan at one of Kyudai's facilities. Many facilities were kids who were orphaned. Kyudai basically used as test subjects and what have you, stealing quirks, taking quirks, and finding out that this one quirk from Shigaraki, his decay quirk, as powerful as it is, finding out that it's actually the destructive side of Overhaul's overhaul quirk all this time, but without the ability to restore, simply because it would make Shigaraki an even more formidable vessel and a far more destructive vessel, and drive his mindset of hating heroes even further. It's really messed up. I love how the series sold us the idea that there isn't an absolute evil, and at the same time, All for One is the main villain. Yeah, it sold us the idea like there is it's like both sides do evil stuff, but then you see All for One doing all this messed up stuff, and then it's like, nah, he's evil. He's evil. He's absolutely evil. And he's not even doing this as to, like, he's not even on Thanos level. I'm not much of a fan of All for One planned everything. See, here's the thing. Not everything went his way, but the dude had tons and tons of contingencies. So I wouldn't say he's like Aizen, oh, I planned all of your battles. Because he just made a whole bunch of plans, and because he was just that insightful. But it's not on Aizen's level. I just don't like it. It's like Horikoshi wanted to redeem Shigaraki's grandma. I mean, she kind of didn't do anything wrong to begin with. I mean, yeah, she kind of didn't really do anything wrong to begin with. We just didn't know the full story. And then we find out that she didn't come back not because she abandoned her kid, but because All for One just basically killed her. So there were plot holes and stuff left off that we didn't find out until recently that kind of filled in those blanks. So let me see. Derived from the overhaul quirk taken from an orphan at one of Kyudai's facilities, in which they stripped it of its ability to reverse its effect, leaving an incomplete copy engineered specifically for destruction. After Tenko accidentally murdered his family during the awakening of his quirk, as well as brutally murdering his abusive father out of revenge, All for One met him under a bridge and granted him a home in safety. He provided Tenko a home and guidance to overcome his violent urges. Kyudai entered the room with Tenko's family's dissected hands, causing the boy to suffer a mental breakdown, remembering his family. So, there's that manipulation right there, just filling a child with PTSD at just like at such a very young age. Kyudai questioned whether All for One should modify Tenko. All for One declines, and that he would teach him how to take his feelings and frustrations and give them purpose, with the end goal being, I'm going to give him purpose so that he can be my new vessel. He doesn't know it yet because he's just the boy. He's just a possession. That's all he is. All for One's never truly cared for anyone. He doesn't care for anyone at all. So whatever affection you may see All for One have for Shigaraki at all, it's all just to make Shigaraki more comfortable around him. But the end all beat all is just essentially Shigaraki is just a means to an end. Just an eventual vessel for him to obtain later on in life. All for One told Tenko that he had an impulse to destroy that couldn't be controlled. He assured him that the impulse didn't have to be controlled, nor was it necessarily a bad thing. One day, Tenko got in a fight with two punks. He was going to fight back and uses the decay on them, but backed down. Later, he threw a tantrum while All for One tried to console the young Tenko, telling him that he should act as his heart commands. Otherwise, he would suffer from it. He explained that conscience, morals, and ethics were all fabrications, intended to restrain people like them. See? Telling a young child that conscience, morals, ethics, anything that would draw a line between humane and inhumane, it doesn't apply to us at all. It's meant to chain us down. So ignore them. Go wild. Kill who you want. Do what you want. It's all for you. Just filling his head with nonsense. And because Tenko's so young and impressionable, this works. Especially after his mental breakdown, he really doesn't know which way is up, and he's just following what All for One says. Literally being led forward with a carrot on a stick, if you will. He asked Tenko one more time what he would like to do. Tenko replied that he wanted to kill the two street thugs, noting that he couldn't hold back his feelings anymore, just encouraging destructive behavior. There's still parents out there like that. He disintegrated. I couldn't even say disintegrated. He disintegrated one of the hands, and All for One smiled and told him to try his best. On a rooftop nearby, All for One and Kyodai watched Tenko murdering the street punks. Kyodai expressed surprise at the event, saying he thought that Tenko had lost his memories. All for One corrected him, noting that the memories were still there, just shut away. He noted that his family's hands would serve to restrain him, keeping all but his negative emotions suppressed. He saw that Tenko was subconsciously keeping his quirk in check. Smiling, All for One expressed pride in seeing Tenko's first step down the path to becoming the symbol of fear, and said that he would cultivate and encourage him on the journey to become his new vessel, of course. Later, All for One awarded Tomura 5 new dissected hands. 4 belonged to the 2 thugs he killed, and he explains that the fifth hand is a small bonus to make up for the one he destroyed earlier. He asked Tenko to put on all the new hands and christened him Tomura Shigaraki, as Tomura means to mourn, and Shigaraki he claims as his own surname. After this, All for One began grooming Tomura as his successor and as the new symbol of fear, knowing that this growing raw hatred of his could be used to finally steal One for All. Then comes the threat of All Might, and thus the story that starts to talk about there are some things that are talked about from vigilantes in here as well. And how long is this? This is very long. This is very long. This is actually going to take me an incredibly long period of time to get all the way down. Yeah, it's going to take me a minute. Huh. Yeah, let's read the threat of All Might, and then we'll move forward. I'll for the most part, I'll paraphrase all the stuff that goes on for All for One, from the threat of All Might past that point. Yeah, from the threat of All Might past that point, his encounter with Kurogiri, All for One calming the hooded man down, who we all know as High End. But let's read the threat of All Might. Hey, the T-Bait chapter was released today for some reason. Oh, don't worry, Roet just told me, which is why this will cut my All for One stream down, because I had no idea we were going to be getting a T-Bait chapter today. But the threat of All Might, Toshinori Yagi. And don't worry, this is a very long synopsis, and it'll probably take me more than an hour, maybe more than 2 hours to get through this. All Might in the let me see, hold on, these reaction things. All Might in the US and All for One's Golden Age would be great spinoffs. They would. They definitely would. So let's read the threat of All Might. Then we'll go down the list we'll just go down the list. We'll skim through it a little bit, and I'll give my whole opinion on All for One as a character and everything that is involved with him. I wish I could read this entire thing out, but, beginning after the end is here, and I might as well get that reaction just set up for all of you guys. The threat of All Might. Toshinori Yagi, Nana's disciple, returned to Japan after a long absence in the United States, and soon became All Might, Japan's #1 hero and the symbol of peace. The reversal of the symbol of fear. All for One attempted to stop All Might with his soldiers and accomplices, though All Might was able to best all of them, and with his actions, All Might began to dismantle All for One's criminal empire. All for One began to suspect that he would eventually be defeated, so he took several contingency measures in case this would happen, such as sending Gigantomachia away into the woods for hiding, Sorry, my inflection was incorrect on that one. Likewise, in collaboration with Kyodai Garaki, All for One duplicated his own quirk, with the intention of transferring it to Tomura when the time comes. In the meantime, Kyodai utilized this duplicate of All for One for various experiments, various Nomu, specifically 9. At some point, All for One recovered the body of the deceased Oboro Shirakumo and had Kyodai turn him into the Nomu called Kurogiri, who served as their close confidant and assistant. He also at one point was approached by the Aoyama family and asked to give a quirk to their quirkless son, Yuga. He gave him Naval Laser. However, like everyone he had made deals with in the past, the Aoyamas were now indebted to All for One and would be forced to follow his commands in fear of death, showing them the bloody remains of those who attempted to act behind his back. All for One and Kyodai also took in many children, which they described as warped, twisted seeds that they could manipulate as part of their own experiments. Kind of like Palpatine having bounty hunters steal children so that he could turn them into, force-sensitive agents all across the galaxy. Just that sort of twisted mentality. As well as use as a part of their own experiments, as well as use for spare vessels in case anything happened to Tomura. One of these people was a young nameless boy only known as Experiment Number 6. He suffered from a case of agnosia, having absolutely no awareness of his own self, whether due to a brain defect or childhood trauma. While Kyodai believed his state to be unfit as a pupil, All for One disagreed, seeing his blank slate as someone they can shape like a wad of clay into whatever form he desires, potentially even the twisted entity they seek. All for One showed him videos and visuals of many pro heroes, telling him to choose whatever quirk and hero most interested him and let that take his form. Number 6 chose O'Clock, who All for One complimented him on, telling him to visualize him as his mentor and that he is the form he's meant to take. Likewise, All for One also went to Sekoto Peak and rescued the burnt remains of Toya Todoroki, seeking to use him as another one of their many spare vessels. Due to the deteriorating state of Toya's body, All for One made all the missing pieces replaced with regenerative tissue. 3 years after rescuing him, Toya had awakened in one of their nurseries where they watch over their spare vessels. They informed Toya that the process of rebuilding his body was a failure, unable to fully make use of his quirk, but still intended to raise him like all the others. However, Toya bluntly refused to be trained by anyone other than his father, and managed to escape. All for One and the doctor let him go, unable to control him due to his obsession with his father, and believing he will die within a month's time due to the fractured body. And then we go really deep into Underground Masquerade, like I said, All for One explaining the concept of what a villain is, him defeating Hien before Hien was turned into a Nomu, and then we have the fall of All for One. All Might and All for One eventually confronted each other in a single brutal combat, and for the first time, All for One faced a devastating loss. All Might emerged triumphant, critically injuring All for One by completely decimating his head in, though he similarly received a debilitating wound in the process. So while All Might basically just punched most of All for One's head off, he just straight up killed him right then and there. All Might received that debilitating side wound that would cause him to have his entire stomach taken out and some of his intestine taken out as well, and would permanently disable his ability to fully use One for All for extended periods of time. Incapacitated by his defeat, All for One was nearly dead at the morgue where Kyodai secretly arrived to recover his body. He treated him, and All for One went into hiding as he attempted to heal from his injuries, having Gigantomachia and Kyodai track down useful quirks to help him recover. Kyodai began working at creating a hyper-regeneration quirk. Quick reminder that All Might defeated All for One with brute strength alone. That's all it took. All Might didn't even have access to the rest of the quirks within One for All. He just had access just to the superhuman aspect. The super strength, the speed, the reflexes, the durability, just the power. He just had access to the power of One for All. Just the basic superhuman power. Nothing. And he beat All for One, who for over a century was able to amass anything he wanted. Had an entire criminal empire, people under his beck and call. God knows how many quirks within him with highly destructive capabilities. And All Might defeated him with just brute strength. That's how strong All Might was. Kyūdai began working at creating a hyper-regeneration quirk, which he believed would be of use to help his condition. However, due to most of his wounds having cauterized, it would have little effect on him. Due to his grievous injuries, he was forced to rely on a life support breathing mask and machines to keep him alive. Because what All Might did was essentially blast off everything above the mouth. Like, this entire portion was just completely blown off. With only, I would say that even I would say even his ears weren't left behind. Because his whole face just completely blown off by one big punch by All Might. Can you imagine having not even just having your whole head punched off? Because you see that in Overlord, where Sebes defeats all of those assassins, and he just punches all of their heads just clean off. We've seen that before. But do you know how powerful... but still, having just that part of your head just blown off completely... And even in this panel from this particular chapter, you just see the massive explosion of, gore and blood from All For One's head when All Might just straight up bodies it. Just straight up, removes it from existence. So then we have the events of My Hero Academia Vigilantes. His time during that. All For One contemplates number 6's rampage, stuff dealing with number 6. All For One is intrigued by Koichi's growth. All For One hears Knuckle Duster mocking him from behind. All For One encourages number 6 to make one last attempt to kill Koichi. All For One is going to apply all the experience he learned into his next plan. So during these events, All For One decides to do some research on Koichi's history, but finds nothing extraordinary about him. I skipped over a whole bunch of stuff. He is just an utterly average guy, born from ordinary parents with a monotonous upbringing, and yet he managed to capitalize a powerful quirk and abnormal battle prowess. The idea that circumstance, experience, and sheer force of will could turn a man into Superman invalidates his methodology behind Operation Anonymous. Coming to this conclusion, All For One wonders how he will be able to respond when civilians start taking heroic action. If extraordinary potential is available to everyone, it may be a path to chaos, but it also introduces uncertainties into his machinations. So even during this time, it's kind of like, who remembers Hopper from A Bug's Life? When the grasshoppers were like making fun of the fact that the ants are weak, sure, one stood up, but he's just one measly little ant. And then Hopper pretty much reminds everyone that if one of them is brave enough to stand up to us, then they'll all be brave enough to stand up to us. And there goes our way of life. That's why we need to keep those bugs in line. So this is the sort of line of thinking that All For One has. If one person is capable of turning himself into Superman, essentially, and he's not even referring to All Might of all people, he's referring to a person that had like a mundane upbringing, normal life, but was able to capitalize on a powerful quirk and have abnormal battle prowess and basically turn himself into someone that could, change All For One's entire worldview and his own methodology, then all citizens, and just, if one person has this potential, what happens if more people have this potential? I remember the same mindset, exactly. What if multiple civilians start to get into their heads that, if this one person stood up to All For One, and he's brave, and he doesn't have any powers, or he's just a person who just came back from like a normal way of life, and there's nothing in particularly interesting about him except for his quirk, then maybe there's a chance for all of us, because he can't kill all of us, but it may encourage other people to join us against All For One. This whole instance against Koichi essentially changes All For One's viewpoint at this point. Let's see. Despite this, All For One tells to Kyūdai and Kurogiri that they have to pour their efforts into their next plan. Should society reach the point where heroes can appear from anywhere, he'll command an entity that can face any hero head-on through its own individual might. In a stasis tube, he looks upon their bio-engineered Nomu, saying that he was led to this culmination by Number 6 himself. All for One continued to groom Tomura as his successor, well aware that Tomura was really the grandson of Nana Shimura and wanted to use this to his advantage. He also assigned Kurogiri with serving and overseeing Tomura's development, warning Kurogiri to use Gigantomachia once he believes to no longer to be capable of ensuring Tomura's safety. Sometime prior to the start of the school year, he created the League of Villains, an organization for Tomura to run and enlist villains to aid in his cause, while acting as a front for his true goals. Shortly before the start of the school year, he learned a rumor that All Might would become a teacher at UA, so called upon the Aoyamas, informing Yuga to apply there, intending to use him as his mole. And that's when the USJ arc, pretty much the start of the series, begins. The USJ arc, UA Sports Festival arc, versus Hero Killer arc. Then we have My Hero Academia 2 Heroes, Forest Camp Training arc, the Hideout Raid arc. That's when All for One basically makes his appearance, devastates all those heroes, Mount Lady, Best Genius, Edgeshot, all these people, and proceeds to just body everyone. And it's in this instance where All Might and All for One have their final battle, and it pretty much ends with All Might defeating All for One again. Despite using the last embers of One for All within his body, All Might still defeats All for One, and then proceeds to have All for One imprisoned in Tartarus. Now, things go down. We go all the way through. Pardon me. We have the final fight between All Might and All for One. All for One gets beaten and is in prison in Tartarus. Then we get to the Provisional Hero License Exam arc. And then we get to the Pro Hero arc, the Joint Training arc, the Para-Liberation War arc. And I still need to watch this. What is it? I haven't seen season 5, and I haven't seen season 6. What is the latest season on? The latest season is 7. So I got 2 full seasons that I got to catch up on of the anime just to watch it. So we have the Paranormal Liberation War arc. Tomura Shigaraki is getting stronger and stronger, and then we have that whole big fight in Deka City, and then Tomura is just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Tomura tells his master to shut up and and destroys his illusion. All for One takes over Tomura's body. Yep, then that's during the events where Shigaraki awakens and he's far more superhuman than we have ever seen before. That's when he wakes up, and that's when let's see here. While facing Izuku, Tomura ends up calling him little brother, a statement that leaves both of them confused because this is All for One inside of Tomura. Because during the events and all this, Tomura had the All for One quirk injected into him. And during the process of Tomura waking up after his operation from Kyudai, after all these big things happened, All for One slowly started to take over his body. While facing Izuku, Tomura ends up calling him little brother, a statement that leaves both of them confused. This allows Tomura to realize that the mysterious inner voice comes from the ego of his master that exists within All for One, which is when we learn about the vestiges of previous quirk users still residing in the mindscape of the individual whose quirk is taken from them, who tries to take over his will. Tomura thanks his master for raising him from the bottom of his heart, but refuses to be controlled by him, as he wants to be greater than All for One was, and breaks free from his image in his mind. However, the heroes begin to get the upper hand in the battle, and when Tomura is burned alive by Endeavor's Prominence Burn attack, All for One's vestige reaches out his hand and suggests Tomura's hand his body over to him. He appears to do so as suddenly as a completely entombed Tomura attacks Endeavor, stabbing him with his Rivet Stab quirk that emerges from his back. The wounded Endeavor wonders how he can stay alive before he starts falling to the ground. And as this is going on, All For One is trying to wrestle control of Tomura's body from within his mindscape, where Midoriya sees him, and we see Nana Shimura seeing him as well. Tomura tries to destroy the presence of All For One. All For One combining his power with Tomura to steal One For All. All For One takes over Tomura's body completely. All For One orders the Nomu to recover his original body. All For One reunites with Tomura, and this at this point where the Nomu break into Tartarus and causes a massive prison break all over in different prisons all over Japan. Not just the one that All For One is at, but multiple ones. And the real All For One starts to gather followers again, except he's using all of these high security inmates as his, like, basically his pawns. Let's see, All For One and Tomura's body alongside the near high ends start to invade Tartarus. They destroy the Bronze Gate as the bridge is lowered, halting them from entering. The near high ends deal with the defending drones while All For One flies over on a flying Nomu. Tomura starts to wake up, leading to an argument between the two over control of the body. All For One reminds him he's doing everything for his sake, because Tomura will become the next me. Now, when we found out, can I just say this? When we found out what that actually meant, I'm grooming him to be the next me. We all thought he meant grooming him to be the next big villain, but no, when he says grooming him to be the next me, All For One meant literally me. It's like me saying, I'm grooming this kid to be the next Kyushu 92. And in that process, I'm really trying to turn this kid into me. Not a facsimile, but just me again. That's how twisted All For One is as an individual. So finding out when he said grooming him to be the next me, he really meant me. Not another version of me, but just another me, but far more powerful. So yeah, just a lot of callbacks to what he said during that whole conversation. All For One struggles to break through due to the immense amount of security in Tartarus and Tomura's increasingly failing body, he figures the only way to success is through a coordinated attack inside and out, and that he'll need help from villains. And then he just starts to break people out of the prison, and then All For One, who I didn't know was 7'4", is breaking people out, and including Lady Nagant as well. All For One is free and ready to achieve his goals. After escaping from Tartarus, All For One orchestrates another large-scale attack using both the Nomu and the freed prisoners to attack 6 different prisons, all to distract the authorities and make it harder for them to track him. All For One is later seen sitting with Tomura and asks Spinner and Dabi to stand guard over him while his body recovers. Spinner asks who Tomura really was, stating All For One wasn't the person he chose to follow. All For One tells Spinner not to worry, saying he has the greatest respect for Tomura's will, and that once his body recovers, both of their desires would come to fruition. But it's really just the desire of All For One here that he's trying to go after. So then we enter into the Dark Hero arc. After leaving Haibori Woods, All For One seeks refuge in a secret underground cave, one of the many safe houses he and Kyudai left behind as a contingency measure. He is greeted by not only a brand new life support mask to replace his original, but also a drug alongside a pre-recorded message from the doctor. It explains how Tomura got a hold of the quirk-destroying drug created by the Shiei Hasaikai, which he immediately attempted to reproduce. After finding out it originated from someone's quirk, he decided rather than focusing on the quirk-destroying part, he focused on its original rewind effect during his recreation. He cautions All For One he can only use it once, but that once he's free, he's sure it'll help him achieve his dream. He ends the message saying that his voice, eyes, and smile bring joy to his heart, and he wishes his heart be filled with hate. So, all this is going on, and the heroes try to track him down to a mansion that one time, and All For One is just talking to him and says, like, now it's your turn, because he's focusing all on Izuku Midoriya since he's the one who holds One For All. So that happens, then we get to the Star and Stripes arc, saying that out of all the people that could put like a real damper into his plan. Star and Stripe, the #1 hero of the United States of America, she is one of the people that would give him a run for his money. So using his connections to the criminal underworld all over the world, he got them to stir up enough trouble so that the nations would have to prioritize their own safety, delaying their arrival to Japan. Let me see here. This was beforehand. After Tomoda's completion and acquiring One for All for One's next goal is to get his hands on New Order, the quirk of Star and Stripe, the #1 hero of America. He believes that with that power alongside his own and One for All, he would finally have everything to make the world bend to his every whim. Because the deal with the New Order quirk of Star and Stripe is, essentially, if she says the name of the thing, then that thing has to do what... If she says a name and then gives that name a command, that thing would then have to follow that command without restriction. So if she says air, the air in front of me will have absolutely no oxygen in a 5-meter radius. And then the air in front of her would have no oxygen. So essentially turning it into pretty much space. No oxygen, no atmosphere whatsoever. So it'll just be like a void of space for 5 meters. It's kind of broken. Or laser, bend to me, and she'll just be able to bend literal light itself. Or she could say like air, become a giant Susanoo that basically follows my commands, and she can create a giant Susanoo that follows her very own movements, and that's kind of broken when you think about it. You can make your own kaiju, your own you can make your own kaiju. Sorry, they're messing with the dogs. You can make your own kaiju that follows your commands, and you can also give yourself superhuman abilities. You can all apply to 2 things at once to herself and another to another thing. But think about it in the hands of All for One. I know I'm droning on, but think about it in the hands of All for One. He could basically tell the United States president, hey, your name, President, you, give me all access codes to all nuclear weapons, or open fire on this nation so that I can go to this nation and offer them aid so that they can serve me, or whatever. It essentially just gives you... Matter of fact, let's just do a little bit of a deep dive of the New Order quirk real quick. Let's just do a New Order. Let's just do a deep dive of it. Sorry, I was pressing buttons that I shouldn't have. I'm pressing things that I should not be pressing. I don't know why it keeps going out. So, New Order. New Order allowed the user to set a rule onto their surroundings by touching the target and calling out their name, allowing them to manipulate and bestow new properties onto themselves and the world around them. This could range from simple descriptions to more conditional ones based on cause and effect. Kathleen could give herself additional abilities as well as manipulate the condition of her opponent's body. Aside from physical effects, such as people, New Order was able to affect incorporeal things such as the air, laser beams, and even other quirks. It was described as a power that redefined what a quirk can be. Indeed, Kathleen could even impose rules on New Order itself, allowing her to alter the quirk's very nature and its own effects. Rules set upon New Order were able to remain active, even if the quirk was removed and ended up with another user. So, it's a good thing that this quirk is gone, because it is incredibly broken for you to basically just be able to remake the entirety of your quirk's own capabilities. Finding, good to see you. Yeah, I can't stay too long because apparently there's a new T-Bait chapter out, so I got to do a reaction to that. But New Order as a quirk, it is mad broken. Weaknesses. In order for New Order to activate, Kathleen was required to both touch the target and say its name. However, when targeting a living being with a sense of self, Kathleen's understanding of the target's identity had to align with their own. This is shown when Tomoda Shigaraki's heart didn't stop when he moved, due to even him questioning his true identity, as either Tomoda, All for One, or Tenko. Because of this, inanimate objects were much easier to target to set rules on, as without a sense of self, Kathleen's one-sided understanding of it was enough to enforce the rule. The effects granted by New Order were not omnipotent, as there were limits to how great they can be. There was also a hard limit on how strong Kathleen could make herself with her quirk, and she could not use it to become all-powerful or invincible. She could always also only impose 2 rules at any given time. So if she decided to implement a new rule, one of the previous rules had to be disengaged. Furthermore, a rule couldn't arbitrarily affect another target she hadn't touched through clever wording, i.e., after she touches the air, make it so that someone who also touches the air will die. Due to Kathleen setting a rule that New Order would revolt against other quirks, New Order acted as like a virus within the body of Tomura, purging several of his quirks, making him unable to use it or any of the quirks while he explodes from the inside out. This eventually resulted in New Order's self-destruction, which left Tomura in a heavily injured state with his quirk factors damaged. And because of this one particular quirk, Star and Stripe was basically seen as one of the biggest obstacles that All For One would have to face. So we go through the whole event with Star and Stripe. Star and Stripe loses to Shigaraki, but also in the process, after he tries to take the quirk from her, the quirk goes rampant inside of Tomura's body, causing him to just destroy tons and tons of quirks. A gigantic Star and Stripe begins to pound away at the vestiges, including the ones of the stolen quirks, causing All For One to curse Star's name. All For One, as Tomura, laments to himself that he can only steal or bestow quirks, but not dispose of them, and desperately tries to find someone he can force New Order onto to stop the quirks from rebelling. Instead, the pilots continue to fire at Tomura with their laser barrage, while inside the Star vestige destroys the Reflect quirk. All For One once again angrily curses Star and Stripe as the Spectre of All Might, an individual he thought he would never have to deal with again. Let's see. Tomura takes the Wing quirk from the remains of the Nomu and desperately escapes the battlefield, intending to find someone to pass on New Order to, once again cursing All Might's existence, taking off into the sky. He crashes in on the hideout of prison escapee Kashiko Kashi, touching his face, planning to take his quirk to make him quirkless, so he can safely transfer a New Order without it revolting, allowing him to preserve it. However, as he's about to, the Star and Stripe vestige mocks him, stating that thanks to all the quirks she revolted against, it has resulted in the destruction of the quirk itself. As she starts to fade away, she declares even though she wasn't able to kill him, as long as people are willing to stand up to save each other, the will of heroism shall be passed on, and will put an end to him. All For One angrily balks that the winner is the one who lives the longest, as the ghost finally vanishes. But Star and Stripe's words then became real, because then more and more people started to stand up against All For One, especially in the later chapters of My Hero, where all the remaining heroes who were capable of fighting, after all the fights were done and the only person left was All For One, everyone still managed to stand up to save each other and also stand against him. So Star and Stripe's words came to fruition in the last 3 chapters. In the last 3 chapters, those words came to fruition. So then we have the UA Trader arc. We have the UA Trader arc, and then we have the Final War arc where everything goes down. All For One gathers all of his pawns, his final pawns for this final fight. Himiko Toga, Dabi, Spinner, Kurogiri, and a whole bunch of other members from Tartarus in order to fight these heroes. And the Aoyama family pulls a fast one on All For One because he thinks that he has the Aoyama family under his thumb, but thanks to Shino and his ability to influence those who respond to him, they were able to fool All For One without him being able to tell that they were lying to him, and thus the heroes separate the villains, and a big, massive battle ensues. You guys know the events that happened during this entire Final War, and then when it gets to the point where Endeavor basically incinerates the body of All For One uses that drug from the hideout we just talked about to reverse his body back to his prime, which I remember when I saw that, I lost it because I thought a prime All For One was going to be a major issue. And he was. He proceeded to just, he started to rewind and his body started to come back. But it also put All For One on a timer, which means that while his body was rewinding and reversing the effects that he had, Prime All For One has returned, like that right there. It put his body on a timer where his body would keep rewinding until he ceased to be. So, He was on a time clock. He had to get to Tomura. One of my favorite All For One moments is when he finally understands why everyone is cheering for Deku, when he understands that Deku is his arch nemesis. He's literally looking at the newest version of a user of One For All, and his desire to beat him is... He's literally the reverse of All For One. His arch nemesis, an individual who does not stop, but really wants to put a smile on everyone's... Basically the same thing that All Might was doing. Like, All Might was his arch nemesis. Now Deku, sharing that same goal as All Might, essentially became his arch nemesis. Everyone cheering him on, not just be out of desperation, but out of consolidated confirmation that Deku would be able to win this fight. And they're also giving him help. See, the thing with All For One is, everyone that exists around him essentially lives for his sake. That is his mindset. That has always been his mindset. So when he sees people rallying together against him, he was so used to being able to just quell rebellions. Like, I literally talked about how he would stamp out any resistance against him, killing everyone. Everyone. And that would be the end of it. And that sort of fear would be put into other people when they would see this happen or hear it happen, and the fear of All For One would just permeate throughout society, so that no one would think twice. People would think twice of going up against All For One. Yet here we are in an age of heroes where it is not like it was a century ago, where people were just scared of any little thing that All For One did, and they just slink back, and they just let him do his thing because they didn't want to be killed. No, we got people here who are not scared of him at all. And that is one thing that just continuously annoyed him. Because people who are not scared of you, being this big bad villain that even the rest of the world fears. Like, North America was all... The president of the United States was all like, well, we need to do whatever we can to pacify and get in his good favor, because we don't want to be on his bad side. Many nations were already thinking of ways to appease All For One simply because of all the things that he was doing throughout the final war. Everyone just thought, he's so powerful, there's nothing we can do. However, since the heroes have been amped up on this incredibly large dopamine effect of, we cannot give up, we need to beat them right now, this has been showing people that, you know what? They might be able to do it. They might be able to do it. So maybe we shouldn't be scared of All For One. And especially, one of the biggest examples of people really starting to get in their mindset of, you know what? Yeah, we shouldn't be scared of All For One anymore, is Midoriya. Because Midoriya, like All Might, has had this insatiable desire for him to be not just a hero, but, you know, save people. And in this final war, this whole arc for Midoriya has just been one big, massive, long marathon run of him doing everything in his power to stop Shigaraki and All For One. So what All For One sees is literally the reason why the heroes will not back down. The very reason why heroes even exist in the first place. They no longer fear All For One. They no longer see him as this individual to be scared of, and that they should, you know, second guess their actions. They're not, I wouldn't say the heroes are throwing caution to the wind, but they see it as, if we do not make this push, we won't make another push at all. The world will never make another push. So, Midoriya going out of his way to put himself, to put himself in harm's way for the sake of others. People rally behind someone saying, I'm not scared of you, All For One. I'm going to keep fighting you. See, when you see people, normally when other people see people doing that, they get in their minds, oh, this person's crazy. Oh, he's going to die. But when you see this person still fight, you know, when you don't see them get immediately decimated by this individual that everyone's scared of, and they still keep fighting, despite what's happening, that's when public opinion starts to shift. You start to notice, he's still fighting. As powerful as All For One is, this individual is still fighting him with everything he's got. That's inspirational. And now we have pretty much the antithesis to everything that All for One stands for. The world exists for my sake. I am all powerful. You can't stand against me. I'm gonna keep using mind games to make you feel smaller than what you are, because like I said throughout the entirety of me covering this series, All for One is an expert at mind games. However, when Midoriya started really pushing towards defeating Tomoda Shigaraki and All for One as a whole, we start to see that Midoriya really starts to change how heroes view themselves and how civilians view themselves. And that causes people to rally behind Midoriya as he pushes to defeat this villain and bring peace to the world and save the world from the evil that is All for One. All for One can't comprehend why people keep rallying behind him, but just the same way that Mihawk saw that Luffy's most dangerous ability is not his devil fruit powers, but his unbelievably high levels of charisma that can cause even his own enemies to side with him. Midoriya has this unbelievably high level of charisma around him that causes heroes, some who even gave up being heroes, such as Death Arms, to come back in order to fight All for One, because it's like, if Midoriya can do it, so can I. This whole thing doesn't register in All for One's mind because he's so used to everyone just fearing him and his plans working so flawlessly. See, they worked to a point. They worked for a whole century and a half. They worked. Until Midoriya started doing what other people wouldn't, and that was not stop. See, Midoriya is a juggernaut. We don't call him a juggernaut, but Midoriya is a flat-out juggernaut. He may not have the size of a juggernaut. I mean, I'm taller than Midoriya, but this dude is a bona fide juggernaut. This man's determination, his willpower, his drive is something that All for One has not accounted for since All Might, because he just thought Midoriya is a child. I don't need to worry about him. I just need to throw a couple of people his way. He'll probably get dismayed. Destroy his greatest idol, his greatest mentor, and he'll just become an inconsequential threat. But now, up until the latest chapter, Midoriya kept proving time and time again that, just like the Juggernaut from Marvel, once he gets moving, he's impossible to stop. And I wouldn't say he's as crazy as All Might, because All Might is crazy. During his final fight with All for One, using that armor, like that All Might armor he had going on, All Might just showed a level of heroic crazy I have never seen before. But Midoriya is unstoppable. Even when he had his arms blown off due to the things that happened inside of Shigaraki's mindscape, he still tried to get up and keep going. And when he got his arms back, even though they were regenerating thanks to Eri, bless her heart, even when he got his arms back, he did not waste any time going. He didn't waste no time moving. And as soon as he started moving, he did not stop at all. Even when all these things that happen, All for One is still wondering, what is going on? I don't understand. See, at a point, All for One's plans worked flawlessly. Even when some failed, he had a contingency to pick back up where he left off and still have his end goal just in sight and just keep going. All of that stopped when Midoriya just kept going, even when Midoriya got his second win. After the civilians tried to tell him, you don't need to be here, you're gonna bring All for One on us because he's after you. After Uraraka checked everyone, after she checked everyone, every lazy, stupid, stinking civilian who thought it's the hero's job for them to take care of us, so they need to handle it. Oh, he needs to rest? No, because he could possibly bring All for One here and that would endanger my life. So he needs to go someplace else. After Uraraka checked everyone and they stank behinds, that's when Midoriya got his second win, and after that, Midoriya did not let up at all. So when it got down to when the original All for One basically met his end, thanks to Bakugo, who's an equal level juggernaut, more on him later, Bakugo fought the original All for One. After All Might failed to stop All for One, but in the process reduce All for One down to a child state because he was steadily steadily rewinding, and massive amounts of damage would increase the rewind effect on him to the point where he was basically a child at that point. He was left with Bakugo, who, like I said, is basically a juggernaut like Midoriya. And All for One could not understand why Bakugo of people was just constantly on him. And then he notices that he had the same look in his eye as Kudo. The same look in his eye as Kudo, the very individual that robbed him of his one and only his greatest possession, who was Yoichi. So events transpire. All for One tries to use an amalgamation of his quirks to get towards Tomura Shigaraki so he can inject his quirk factor into his body, All for One into his body, and then take over his body, and then his plans would be done. Bakugo says, like, and proceeds to blast his face, even when he's using the ultimate version of all of his quirks combined to just blast forward and decimate everything in front of him just to get to Tomura. Bakugo said, like, hold this, and proceeds to blast his face. And in the process, with a blast so powerful, it regresses and rewinds All for One to that of a child, where even as a child, he uses the very first quirk he stole, which is spear-like limbs or spear-like bones, to try and attack Bakugo, but it's too late. All for One, the original All for One, regresses to a baby, and then regresses into a fetus, and then regresses into an embryo, and then proceeds to just disappear from existence. Everything. And in this moment, we see All for One no longer the calm and collected individual. We see him losing himself. We see him raging and being filled with anger like a child. That all of his plans were failing, and no matter what he tried, there were still people to stand against him, even more ferocious than One for All users of the past. So, we get to Tomura, who, after having his mindscape shattered and his emotions repressed, All for One raises up again after being engulfed by Shigaraki and held down in his psyche. Midoriya unknowingly unleashed All for One again, but this time, instead of All for One facing Midoriya by himself, even though Midoriya lost his arms, that's when we have the Avengers Endgame lineup of heroes who are capable of fighting coming up to save and help Midoriya. They heal him up, they put a shirt on him, and then they go to town defending Midoriya so that Midoriya can land the one final hit on All for One. All for One is spent. His body that he's spent so many years cultivating pretty much is beyond the point of repair. He's now sorrowful and bored because the only thing he has left, because in the process, we not only lose the decay quirk of Shigaraki, which he can't use to devastate the landscape and kill everyone, but we also lose One for All. The very purpose of this war, the very reason why he was going after One for All users in the first place. We lose One for All completely. It's gone. It's no longer the same ridiculously powerful quirk that we saw beforehand. It's been separated, spliced out, and then sent into Shigaraki in order to penetrate his mindscape, which was successful, but in the process destroyed the quirk as a whole in the process. And Midoriya is only left with a vestige of One for All, and he uses that to deal the final blow to All for One, who in his desperation is scared of Midoriya. Frantic even. The very opposite of how he's always behaved over the century and some years he's been alive. He cannot comprehend anything that's happening in front of him. No, stay away from me. Get back. He's literally desperate to keep himself away from Midoriya, because Midoriya then lands the final hit on the outside. And also, not only do we have the One for All users dealing the final blow to All for One on the inside, but also Tomura, who at once was swallowed up by All for One after All for One raised up again. He, along with the rest of the users of One for All, proceed to destroy All for One, and with this punch, Not only is Shigaraki's body unfortunately destroyed, but All for One is destroyed as well, bringing this century-long lived villain to a final end. Though it cost the life of Tomura Shigaraki, though it cost the life of Tenko Shimura, I should say, it also brought about the end of the most powerful villain that we have ever seen in My Hero Academia. Now, I know I did a whole bunch of paraphrasing there, but All for One as a villain, and even after all that, while this is happening, Midoriya says that all this stuff that you've done, matter of fact, we gon' fact check. We gon' fact check from the latest chapter. Let me go back to the exact words that Midoriya said. And as Midoriya is coming up on All for One, he says, "All for One, I can't look past what you've done, but you're not some monster beyond all understanding. No, stop. And you're no demon lord. Don't look at me. All you are is a lonely man." And All for One is in the vestige realm, looking as he sees the vestige of Yoichi going, "Yoichi?" Midoriya managed to adjust that violent transfer in such a way that the barest fragment would remain intact. And then the resonance with his ember awakened me to do right by these last shreds of me, all so that he could complete One for All as we were meant to be. I don't care, none of that matters. Don't fade away, show me your face. Impossible. My time is up. You can't go. And as this is happening, All for One is shifting in appearance in this mindscape. The appearance he has when All Might destroyed the upper part of his head, the appearance he had when he was in his prime before that event happened, the appearance he had when he was a teenager when he went to go kill the luminescent baby, or we might as well call him the luminescent man at the time, and the time when he was a child when he killed all those anti-meta people. And while this is going on, he says, "No, I won't allow it. I love you like no other. I'm hopeless without you. I'm nothing." Because he still sees his brother. It's not love. It's just love of a possession. Not love of an individual. Not love of a sibling, but just love of a possession. It's time to pay the price for exploiting all for yourself. Because he awakened more than just me. As it shows all the previous users of One for All, and then lastly Shigaraki, as their fists come together to destroy All for One. And in the process, we get like the final fist bump of like Tenko and Midoriya. And in the process, the skies part from the shockwave of this attack, and we get the end of All for One himself. So, while I did do a bunch of paraphrasing, I apologize if I couldn't go on a little bit longer. This has been my analysis. I've always given my analysis of All for One whenever he shows up within the chapters. And to see him reach a conclusion where he not only dies alone, but the very individual he spent his entire life trying to reobtain helped destroy him. And for all of his machinations, for all of his efforts, all of his contingencies, all of his plans to regain his brother and thus rule over the world, it was brought about by a quirkless 16-year-old. One of you guys said that during my last reaction. In his efforts to create this body that no one could ever touch, the strongest superhuman body in the world that we've basically seen, with capabilities far beyond that of even quirks, met its end at the hands of an individual who was essentially quirkless, and thus using the last vestige of One for All in his body. So Midoriya wasn't even at his strongest when he defeated the most powerful villain this series has ever seen, in an even more powerful body. Granted, it was still heavily damaged due to the effects of all the fighting and New Order and everything that's been going on, but it was still incredibly powerful, that everyone was still having a hard time, but, still managed to defend themselves. All for One is dead. Both the original and the vestige that took over Tenko's body. Tenko is unfortunately dead. While some may have wished for him to pay for his crimes through atoning, I feel like him destroying his master still plays off of his, destructive nature. But All for One is dead. Everything he tried to do, his mind games, his manipulation, him and his twisted ways of trying to create a vessel so that he could steal One for All and take his brother back so he could thus rule over the world with his brother having absolutely no way to buck up against him because he would possess the quirk that still had his brother infused into it. All of that met by the juggernaut known as Midoriya, along with all the other heroes that chose to stand against him rather than cower away in fear. This man died alone. He didn't get his brother. He didn't have any of his henchmen with him. He didn't have anyone to back him up. He died alone. Because he was the individual where he said it in the beginning. If no one helped me, if no one gave me what I wanted, I held them. I responded with distrust. If you didn't give him what he wanted, he basically killed you. He surrounded himself with tons and tons of people, tons and tons of possessions. He was surrounded and thus never truly alone. But then, at the end of it all, after everything he tried to do, he died with not a single person to back him up, not a single possession to give him aid. He died the exact opposite of how he wanted to live his life. Because really, the real way to tell just how All for One is as a person is how he responded when the luminescent baby at the time, previously, how he had more than All for One had. So all that jealousy of, someone having more and you being alone, all of that meant absolutely nothing in the end because he still wound up alone. And that's pretty much all he ever really deserved. He died alone. And it took one lone punch, not like a whole bunch of heroes just hitting him with attacks and everything, but really just one individual, one kid, one young teenager stood up against him. Sure, he had help from everyone else, but he was the one that dealt the final blow. And then the last words he hears in life, is all you are, all you what is it? Well, let me go back. All you are is a lonely man. Those are the last words you hear before your entire body is destroyed, meaning that everything you've built up this whole time, and all you are at the end is a lonely man. The most powerful villain we've ever seen in My Hero. And this is how he goes out. He deserves it. After everything he's done. It wasn't one punch, it was two. Shigaraki was there. Yeah, in the Mindscape, he was punching that version of All for One, but I mean in the real world. I mean actually in the real world. He's not like Shigaraki is just like extending out of his body and then proceeding to punch him. That's not how it is. But yeah, yeah, I understand your meaning. Shigaraki landed a hit on his master from the inside, while Midoriya landed a hit from the outside. I understand what you mean, though. But I feel, and I know some people feel some type of way about this particular ending of All for One. Saying, like, maybe it felt a bit too rushed, but I feel like this is a perfect end for someone who thought he could get everything. Did we ever see what happened to the high-end Nomus, or would we see it in the new movie? I believe a great deal of the high-end Nomus got destroyed. I think a lot of them got destroyed. I think the last Nomu we saw was... I think all of them got destroyed. Hold on. High-end Nomu. Let me see here. Final War arc. Let's see what happened to all of them. Okay, so the last we saw was in the Final War arc. Use a whole bunch of high-end Nomus. Let's see, 2 near high-ends. end up on Okuto Island alongside Himiko Toga, one in Camino with Dabi, and one at the ruins of the Gunga Mountain Villa with All for One, with the remaining 2 high-end locations currently unknown. So there's still currently 2 high-ends that are unaccounted for. As it stands, they are unaccounted for. So that's interesting. There were 3 left, though. There were 3 left. So the one in the Gunga Mountains, that's the one that's still left. So there's still 3 Nomu left. Because it was either the one in Camino, either the one too near high ends, let me see, too near caused a great deal of trouble with the heroes realizing that All for One gave them more quirks to their increased strength since the Para-Liberation War. The near high ends in Camino also caused immense devastation, dwindling down the heroes alongside Dabi's intense fire tornado. So, listing all of the Nomu. Let's see. Nomu from USJ, arrested. Winged Nomu, deceased. Four-Eyed Nomu, arrested. Eyeless Nomu, deceased. Nomu Chainsaw, arrested. Johnny Nomu, deceased. Mocha Nomu, deceased. Hood, deceased. Robot Nomu, deceased. Chubbs, deceased. Woman Nomu, deceased. Elf Nomu, deceased. Ribby, deceased, and the near high ends, it says 6 still active. They can more or less be disposed off camera. I mean, yeah, because in consequence to everything that's transpired here, the Nomu are not really too big of an issue compared to All for One and Shigaraki and even the Tartarus members that we saw as well. So I'm not too concerned with the Nomu. I am not too concerned with the Nomu. Because really, at the end of the day, it's really more important that All for One get disposed of completely rather than the Nomu. The Nomu can be taken care of. If there's still a factor, which I highly doubt they are, if there's still a factor, I wouldn't be too concerned with it. Because with the threat of All for One down, handling the Nomu is going to be a far easier time. Even if they're near high ends, it's going to be a far easier time than dealing with All for One. But, ladies and gentlemen, All for One as a villain, so steadfast in his machinations that he thought nothing could topple it until he met an individual who goes against convention, doesn't know what the word slow down means. You say run, literally given form. The way I said that sounded very weird. A person who essentially doesn't know the word slow down at all. Basically a juggernaut in the body of a teenager. And all of his plans just start to fall apart because Midoriya has this incredibly high sense of heroism in him. After spending so much time with All Might, learning from Gran Torino, learning from the previous users of One for All, and just his own disposition towards heroism, he basically became the one person that could stand against All for One. No matter what All for One did, Midoriya still kept going up against him without any slowdown whatsoever. It's incredibly insane just how much drive this young boy had to stand against a villain who has existed pretty much before any other character in the entire series. Any other major character we've known, All for One has been alive since before then, and yet all of his plans, his dream of becoming a demon lord, because he read it in the comics, even though he said that the stuff that happens in the comics is all just a story. You can't expect the things that happen in comics to become real, and yet he still strived to make what he saw in the comic real just because it worked with him so well. What would they do about the Doctor, All for One's right-hand man, if villains try to break him out? I highly doubt villains are going to want to try anything, Specifically, because think about this. Think about this, Fallen. The same way All for One intended to plunge the entire world into despair by trying to rip apart All Might on live television, that whole measure of, and you guys brought this up when I was doing a reaction, what would happen if All Might actually died? If he died, it would be one of the most demoralizing things to ever happen to the entire world. Seeing the number one hero, just the symbol of peace. I smell something. It smells like something burning. It smells like something in the oven. The symbol of peace, watching that symbol of peace being ripped apart live on television, that would demoralize any future heroes. That would be the most demoralizing thing you would see on public television. So, what we have here is Midoriya fighting the world's most powerful villain. A person that inspires other people to be villains, but also literally the one most dangerous person in the world. And you see that person get bodied. You see that person just flat out destroyed. That demoralizing effect will happen to the villains. Because everyone was so sure that All for One could never lose. He was just so strong. What happens when you see someone called that strong and have that sort of prestige over them when you see them not only defeated, but basically just turned into ash? How does that do for your morale? As a villain, how does that do for your morale? Think about that. Do you want to still become a villain? Hold on, give me a sec. Okay, I'm back. Man cave door was open. Boys were barking. Michael Malger, good to see you. I'm coming towards the end of my discussion of All for One. But yeah, think about it. How demoralizing would it be for a villain where you see the most powerful villain you've ever known just get utterly destroyed by a young boy? Do you want to become a villain after that? That's essentially that's like Brainiac during the events of Justice League Unlimited, where he's trying to enact Armageddon. And then the one person who's always wisecracking, the Flash, winds up being the one who beats Brainiac, separating Brainiac and Lex Luthor. Do you want to be a villain? Do you want to be a villain against... Matter of fact, you know what? No. A good comparison is essentially you trying to be a villain. You trying to be a villain in Metropolis. You're trying to be a villain in Metropolis. You see Darkseid devastating the city. Then you see Superman fly in, and you just see him go like, I feel like I live in a world made of cardboard. Like that whole entire scene in Justice League Unlimited where he's fighting Darkseid. You're a villain. You are thinking of becoming a villain. Then you, in the very city where Superman exists, and you see him beating up Darkseid, and proceeds to just body him across the city. Do you want to be a villain after that? Do you want to chance it? Seeing the determination of heroes who were thought to be demoralized just because of All for One's machinations, and yet they still stood up, hurt, some incredibly injured, and they all stand together against this one villain, and it brings about the villain's complete and total demise. Do you want to still be a villain after that? Do you want to test them? Do you really want to test them? That's the question. So it doesn't even matter about Kyudai anymore. It doesn't matter about Godaki anymore. Because no one's going to be dumb enough to try and break him out if they know the villains are this determined to stop All for One, who they all thought was the end-all beat-all. There is no one above All for One in terms of threat in the world of My Hero. When you get rid of him, everyone down the list is easy. And when you see a whole conglomerate of heroes gather together to defeat All for One and they succeed, you ain't gonna really want to test them. Especially when they're this serious. In the comics, some villains mention the problem with being a villain in is Metropolis is not Superman, but the other villains. Do you want to play in Lex Luthor City? Yeah, that's another thing you got to worry about. Other villains. I see you trying to move in on my turf. Did you pay tribute? Did you get my permission to operate in this sector? Who told you you could take this entire city block? This is my city. You don't need to worry about Superman. You need to worry about me. Because unlike Superman, I will kill you. So there's that thing there. But as a villain who normally only has to worry about the superhero in that town, would you want to be a villain? Would you want to test the waters? Would you want to try it? After everything you've done, would you really want to try it? Kitty, hey! Being a villain in Metro City, you're thinking of Megamind, aren't you? But I'm coming in on the end of my discussion about All for One as a villain in My Hero Academia. And then I gotta prepare because I knew the beginning after the end chapter actually released early today instead of it just dropping tomorrow. So now I gotta change up what I'm gonna do tomorrow instead. Hopefully that new Grand Blue Fantasy Relink update drops so I can play Sandalphon tomorrow, because I would very much like to play Sandalphon tomorrow if it does happen to drop. But we'll see. But as it stands, this has been my like deep dive into All for One. Like I said, I wish I could have gone down his entire synopsis, and this stream would have been a lot longer after that. But I feel like me speaking my mind and my words on All for One would do a lot better than just me reading out every single last thing of his entire synopsis and just giving my own opinion on why I think he's a fantastic villain who got exactly what he deserved. Nothing. He died. That's the thing, though. Over a century of you doing all these plans, fighting all of these one-for-all users through every iteration in an attempt to gain your... Sorry, it stopped. Don't worry, I see it. Hold on, I saw it. Don't worry, I saw it. Yeah, okay, so all these one-for-all iterations in an attempt to gain your brother back. I remember what I said. All these one-for-all iterations in order to gain your brother back, who was your first possession, and he belonged to you. All for One was always the main villain? Yes, he was. Shigaraki was just an unfortunate pawn facing all these one-for-all iterations to get your brother back, and also influencing the siring of a child who you would then groom due to this child and implant a quirk in his body so that he could accidentally murder his family, and due to the mental instability, use him and groom him from a child into a young adult who you just instill the most heinous of life lessons. Conscience, morals, ethics, none of that. All those were meant to just chain people down, saying the best stuff, the worst stuff, but the best stuff for this child so that he would just have a mindset of hatred, which you would then use to try and take one for all. Then you do all these things that influences numerous people all over the world to join your side, gain a massive following, cause these events that causes many people to die. Hundreds, if not thousands of people to die over the course, if not hundreds of thousands of people to die over the course of your entire life, all for the attempt of trying to get your brother back. And then you see the point where you could possibly bring down your one main adversary. He beats you, and you still think, oh no, I can make this work. So you cause things to work in the background, cause the breakout of you being in prison, cause the total downfall of all prisons that are holding quirk users, evil quirk users, and then go on this full bout and enact a war in an attempt to gain one for all by causing Shigaraki to become an even more powerful being, and then put him in a position where you can take over his body, steal one for all, hopefully steal the New Order quirk. Hopefully steal the New Order quirk, and then just bend the entire world to your will. And yet you are met by a 16-year-old boy who, for all intents and purposes, is impossible to keep held down. You see all before you. You think everything's going fine. I got all these young minds in front of me. They're the pawns I sent out. I got all these Nomu. I got all these villains. There's absolutely no way these heroes are going to defeat me. And I'm just going to keep demoralizing. I'm just going to keep playing mind games on all these individuals. I'm just going to keep trying to, peck at the head of these heroes who are trying to stand up against me. It's going fine. It's going smoothly. Then you get your body burnt to a crisp, and then you have no other choice but to use the quirk rewinding drug that Kyodai gave you so you can go back to being in your prime and proceed to show everyone this is how strong I was in my heyday. And you body everyone. Everyone sees these heroes getting bodied by you left and right, and they start to get demoralized. They're scared of you. You think victory is at hand, a new Genesis is at hand, and I will be the creator. Just on a full Wesker nonsense, you think everything is fine, but you realize you're on borrowed time, so let's just traipse on over to Shigaraki so I can implant myself into him so I can gain control of his body, and thus continue my plan for world domination and getting one for all back. However, you are met by people who stop you at every turn. You can't fully comprehend what's going on here because you thought my plan was working. Wait, what's going on? These heroes are determined. This is new. I've never had to face someone who's this determined before. All Might was determined, but he can't fight anymore. So why are they determined? All Might is weak now. Their very reason for wanting to become heroes is he's weak now. Why are they still determined? I don't understand. So, you're met time and time again by people who want to stop you, and you can't really mentally understand why they are so determined to stop you. You start getting upset. You start losing control of your emotions. And then your real body, which has regressed repeatedly because of the interference of All Might, a person you thought would never be able to stand against you again, proceeds to stand against you again, and proceeds to show you, yeah, I'm crazier than you, and unleashes so many attacks that it causes your body to regress to that of a child. And not only do you think you have the upper hand by beating down All Might, you think, I'm gonna demoralize the entire world by ripping the symbol of peace in half for the whole world to see. That would demoralize any attempts against me. That would demoralize any sort of thought process of, we need to fight all for one. That would dissuade any notions of retaliation. Then you get intercepted by yet another crazy individual, a boy who uses explosions as a quirk, and even though his body is tired, even though he almost literally died moments before, he comes back and proceeds to show you, yeah, you are not long for this world. And as you are fighting this individual, you still can't understand why these people are doing their best to stop you. So, you try to use the amalgamation of all of the quirks you've stolen over the century in an attempt to just blast your way forward, force your way forward in an attempt to get to your prize, so you can get to your prize. So, you do it. You use your ultimate quirk, and it fails. This doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem right at all. Wait, I used all of my quirks, all the destruction that I'm capable of using, all the vestiges of people I've manipulated and killed and stolen from. Why didn't it work? This boy with explosions for powers manages to not only stop you, but completely decimate you in one instance that you physically cannot stand it. And since your body is still rewinding from the quirk rewinding drug I mentioned earlier, your body regresses to that of a baby. Your original body is now beyond the state of ever being able to reach your goal. Your original body is kaput! It's gone! And in a last-ditch effort, you try to kill the one individual who just stopped you. And it stops short of actually killing this person because your body no longer has the energy in order for you to kill this individual who stopped you, period. Thus ends your first body. Then, you take over the mind of the boy you've groomed all of these years. You proceed to realize, well, this body's been heavily damaged and destroyed. I can't I can't use decay anymore to kill all these heroes. I can't use New Order because that's been destroyed. One for All is within me, but now it's just completely and utter destroyed. So now there's nothing left but world domination. You're sad. You're sad that your overall goal of achieving One for All, that has been pushed away. You can't get it anymore. So the only thing you got left is world domination. World domination, and it's just so utterly boring. But now you just resolve yourself to destroying the one sense of your ire, the direction of your pain, the amalgamation of your frustration, Izuku Midoriya, who, despite after losing his arms in this mindscape with Shigaraki, manages to get them back and also get back up. With all available heroes who are capable of standing from Gang Orca to the students of Shiketsu to students of Class 1A and Class 1B, even people who said, I'm done being a hero, such as Death Arms, joining in to stop you. You still can't fully comprehend why these so-called side characters still want to stand against you. So you lash out, with your attempts of trying to hit Midoriya met with opposition, as every single hero who shows up, thanks to who you thought would be your most reliable assistant and confidant, Kurogiri, the human side of him still manages to surface and allows all of these heroes to come into the playing field, and thus frustrating you further, because it's more ants you have to squash, more insects you have to destroy. So that goes on, and then all of a sudden, you notice that this boy is not stopping. For all your efforts over the past century, for all your efforts over the past couple of years, mind you, because let's just face it, it's only been a couple of years. It's only been like maybe, 2 years? Maybe two and a half years? All that you have strived to achieve over the century, your power, your fame, your notoriety, your influence, the despair that the air would be filled with when people would even mention your name. All of that comes to a screeching halt. The very reason why you're fighting the users of One for All in the first place, your very reason for basically living. All of that comes to a screeching halt thanks to not only this boy punching you from outside, but also the very person you tried to groom and take over and crush under your heel and influence, punching you from the inside. So every aspect of you disappears in one final act of defiance. From the outside, the defiance of accepting you as an individual that is going to take over this world and thus plunge this world into despair, where everyone lives for your sake, and the act of defiance from the inside, from the very person you tried to take over in the first place. So all you are left with is nothing. Everything that I've said, everything that All For One has tried to achieve, and he is left with nothing. And that's all he deserves. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been my deep dive into All For One, the loneliest villain who died with nothing. Now, we get to see what happens in the remaining chapters of My Hero before it ends. I can't wait, but I'm done, because family is calling me for lunch. All I can say to you is, I love having these talks about My Hero Academia, and I'm looking forward to the next one. But I'm done. It's time to eat before I get started with the beginning after the end. Hope you all enjoyed. Can't wait to see you all in my next video. Like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, because I am always looking forward to entertaining you. So have a fantastic day, and once again, as always, later, peoples!